All right, good afternoon, Midwest.io. How are you? It's a long day, you're tired, I get it, but all right. Better, thank you. The would-be public speaker finds guidance in the Talmud, poiskin b'kavoid echsanya, open by honoring the host. It would be remiss not to begin by publicly acknowledging the tremendous effort that an event of this magnitude requires from the organizers, volunteers, and sponsors. Beyond that, the care and personal investment that the team has made in making this a best-in-class experience for speakers and attendees is apparent. Please, join me in giving them a round of applause. I would like to take this opportunity also to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this very special way. It is an honor to be standing here before you this afternoon, especially following such an incredible lineup of speakers and presentations. I am humbled, and you have my appreciation. The Talmud further observes, Ein melech bli am. A sovereign does not rule without a populace. Now, I would be the last person to ever compare a public speaker to a king. But the fact of the matter is that without an audience, without you, I'm just a guy up here talking to himself. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me this afternoon and entrusting me with your time and your attention. For those that may not know me, my name is Yitzchok Willroth. Though if it's easier for you, I found that answering to just Yitz tends to keep me drier. So it's okay. You might be more familiar with me as Code Rabbi, for I spend all too much time in all of the obvious places on the internet, hiding behind this guy. I build stuff, and I help others build stuff. But it wasn't always this way. Software development is actually my third career. Following college, I found myself running the hamster wheel of corporate America, where I worked for this guy. And that continued, somewhat predictably, for several years, until one day I decided that I was spiritually impoverished. I promptly resigned, sold everything I owned. I had a massive garage sale. I moved to Jerusalem, and I enrolled in a yeshiva, a traditional Talmudic academy, rabbinical school, where I began working for this guy. Now, in case you're vague at this point about the Talmud is the written record of the conversations of the ancient sages. It serves as the primary repository for the law, legend, and lore of the Jewish people, and it's the essential focus of rabbinic scholarship. As for me, I returned to America. I was fortunate enough to spend over a decade engrossed in full-time Talmud study, until I came to the slow realization that at that point I had become financially impoverished. So a computer had been part of my life ever since my mother sent me to a summer college for kids program at a local business school when I was 8, where I learned rudimentary basic programming on the TRS-80 Model 1. So faced with the prospect of leaving rabbinical school, and really with little in the way of options, I made the decision to begin working for this guy as a software developer. Now, as it turns out, working for that guy is not so simple. High expectations, limited background, no formal training, and perhaps worst of all, beginning in my 30s, squarely behind the financial 8-ball, zero margin for error. Now, almost immediately, I recognized that there were parallels between software development and Talmudic study. The Talmud describes rabbinic analysis as maven davar metoich davar, understanding one thing from within another, teasing out abstractions from concretions. Both disciplines, highly analytic in nature, but possess an undeniable creative component as well. Both require extended periods with high cognitive load and often an incredible ability to maintain context. Interestingly, I found also that both are vocations whose practitioners tend to also pursue them as vacations. You'll very often see someone come home after a long day of toiling in their craft, only to relax by engaging in an activity very, very similar to that which had consumed their day. And if you know anything about software developers or rabbis, you'll know that the similarities, of course, don't end there. Now, recognizing those similarities, when faced with challenges as a growing software developer, my instinct was to look back on my experiences and the insights I had gained in rabbinical school for guidance. Perhaps surprisingly, but I did. I found that the analogy between the disciplines, it was more than merely superficial, that the wisdom of the sages could be readily translated into practical advice for the growing software developer. Ultimately, I found what could also be titled for our conversation this evening, and that is everything that I really needed to know, I learned in rabbinical school. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering what to expect. Well, our session is primarily about advice. I mean, why else do you visit the rabbi? In the next 40 minutes, I hope to share with you my experiences, the wisdom of the sages as I've been able to apply it to grow as a software developer. What the Talmud calls yayin yoshon b'kankan chadoshim, aged wine in new flasks. Classic wisdom, but with novel application. Let's begin, shall we? The sage Yeshua ben Prachi advises, Asa lecha rav v'kana lecha chover. Cultivate for yourself a mentor. Acquire for yourself a colleague. Now, the wisdom of the sage's advice and its application to the challenges we face, it should be evident. Our growth as software developers, it's a journey. And what journey isn't enhanced by the counsel of a wizened guide and the fellowship of trusted companions? Cultivate for yourself a mentor. We work in an industry where the domain knowledge required to function at a high level, it's so vast and so rapidly changing that any Gladwellian approach, 10,000 hours, to its acquisition, it's not merely inefficient, it's impossible. I mean, really, who has time for that? The single most effective way to accelerate your learning curve is to receive meaningful, timely, and personal guidance from someone who has trod that path before. Young craftsmen, they learn from journeymen. Doctors, they serve as interns for many years before practicing on their own. Professional golfers even have swing coaches. Why should our industry be any different? Now, fortunately, in my primary community, we have an incredible resource which connects willing mentors with potential apprentices. It's called PHPMentoring.org. I've taken advantage of that initiative as an apprentice twice. Both were very powerful experiences, which not only made an immediate measurable impact upon my proficiency as a developer, but looking back, it was very obvious they had accelerated my growth tremendously. But the key takeaway here, if that's not your community, that's fine. The key takeaway is that there are always more mentors than apprentices. Mentors are there for the taking. Now note, though, that language of cultivate a mentor, know the very best mentors, like Yoda there, they're not always openly looking to take on an apprentice, likely because they understand the tremendous commitment involved, taking partial responsibility for the growth and success of another. The incredible irony, though, is that the same appreciation for the weight of the undertaking that makes them reluctant, it's also what makes their mentorship so valuable. The simple recipe for mentor cultivation involves just 3 steps: identify, interact, and initiate. Identify potential mentors, interact and grow your relationship with them, and then take initiative. In all likelihood, you already have relationships with potential mentors, be it a seasoned teammate, perhaps someone that you know from your local user group, or have worked with on an open source project. Now, once you've identified them, grow your interaction with them. Chat them up, ask them questions, then do it again, and do it again. Once you've established that history of going to them for advice, then take that initiative. Ask them if they consider formalizing the relationship. Yeah, it takes courage, but you would be amazed at how frequently it's successful. And that language of cultivate a mentor also implies that the mentoring relationship need not be formal, nor does it need to be exclusive. I am constantly on the look, cultivating ad hoc mentors for myself, seeking out people who have the knowledge and disposition to serve as personal subject matter experts that I can call on if I need guidance in a particular area. Most of them, not even aware of it, but they're stored away in my mental Rolodex of who to call in case of an emergency. My friend Gary Hocken, he recently tweeted this about his interaction with Marco Provetto over some questions that he had regarding doctrine ORM. Now, the amazing thing is not that Marco gave Gary 30 minutes of his time simply because Gary asked. No, you'll find that that is typically the rule rather than the exception within the open source community. The amazing thing here is that Gary asked. Gary gets it. The value of a mentor, even a mentor for a minute, is immeasurable. So whether you apprentice yourself formally, either PHPMentoring.org in my community, or maybe the old-fashioned way, or you cultivate fields of ad hoc mentors, and they're not mutually exclusive, I suggest that you do both. The primary takeaway here is that there are people out there who are able, and in far more cases than you think, willing, many times very, very willing, to help you accelerate your growth as a software developer. As professionals, it would be negligent not to take advantage of them. Acquire for yourself a colleague. The pairing of that advice with that of cultivating a mentor, it's significant. It means that the key takeaway from the sage's direction is to view people as your most important resources. And that's perhaps more obvious in the case of a mentor, but we mustn't underestimate the value of strong relationships and meaningful interactions with our fellow developers in terms of advancing our professional growth. One way that that can manifest for us in this industry is via pair coding. The technical benefits of pair programming aside, that opportunity to mind meld with another developer over an implementation is incredibly powerful. To experience firsthand and in real time how another developer, how they analyze a problem and how they break it into manageable parts, the decisions and the trade-offs that they make when implementing a solution. The benefit of that sort of direct cross-pollination, it's immeasurable. Whether it's a new algorithm, a debugging technique, an expanded naming vocabulary, even helpful keyboard shortcuts in your IDE. It's difficult to pair at any level and not walk away from the experience having integrated something new and valuable into your practice. Now, the most obvious place to pair code does remain the workplace. Everybody's kind of there at the same time working on the same sort of things. And I understand that's not always an easy sell. But know that even occasional pair coding can be tremendously beneficial for your teams, whether it's as a way to onboard new developers, to diffuse tribal knowledge throughout the team, or as a force multiplier, allowing junior developers to more easily leverage the knowledge and experience of those more senior. Your teams should be pairing in at least some fashion. Now, of course, if you're unable to introduce even occasional pairing for your team, your local user group is an excellent place to start. Pair programming night. It's a fantastic recurring activity for a user group. And what about open source collaborators? I am sure that there are people who contribute regularly to the same projects that you do, who would be thrilled with the idea of remote pairing on a feature or two, if only they were asked. Marcelo Jacobus even posted an open invitation to pair on his blog. I've not yet met Marcelo, but Marcelo gets it. There is power in pairs. Now, if you're unable to pair at all with a colleague, perhaps the next best thing is to engage in regular code review. Now, I'm sure most of you have some sort of code review process in the workplace. But how many of you engage in regular code review outside the workplace? I ask that question a lot, and I find that it's really a very, very small percentage. Think about it, though. Our employers are more heavily invested in code review than we are. I'm not totally surprised, of course. The fallacy of viewing code review merely as some mechanism for enforcing coding standards or protecting the build, it's a common one. But the fact of the matter is that those are at best tangential benefits to the practice of code review. The primary beneficiary of code review is the coder rather than the code. And if you're not engaging in regular code review both inside and outside the workplace, you're missing an excellent opportunity for growth. Both that process of having your code reviewed by a peer and by reviewing another's code regularly, they offer considerable leverage in terms of growing your tactical skills as a developer. Find a code review buddy. Offer to review the code of someone else if they'll return the favor. Approach someone in your local user group, someone who contributes to the same open source project that you do, someone you met at a conference, wherever. My friend Yitzchok, he recently even went so far as to tweet an open review, or an open offer to review other people's code. Yitz gets it. He recognizes that code review benefits the reviewer as much as the reviewee, and he took the initiative to put himself in a place where he would be able to engage in more of it. Side projects, another fantastic opportunity to leverage your peer relationship to foster your growth. The next time you begin a side project, resist that urge to work on it alone or to immediately invite contributions from the greater community. Instead, invite just one or two other developers to work with you closely on it. Perhaps form a learning group with a few of your peers. My friend Jeff Caruth, co-host of the Loosely Coupled podcast, he's currently organizing the second iteration of the Dev Book Club, a bi-monthly discussion group. It's focused on key software texts utilizing Google Hangouts. It has been a tremendous learning experience for everyone involved in the project. Jeff gets it. And those groups, they don't have to be ongoing. My friend Sean McCool, co-host of the Development Discussions podcast, he began that project as a series of ad hoc, very topic-focused hangouts, very much like the Open Spaces gatherings at conferences. Sean gets it. And know also that power of peers, it's not limited to learning. My friend Lee Tingham, the author of the excellent 11k.io newsletter, he looked to leverage a peer relationship for accountability. Lee gets it. Possibilities, they're literally endless. But it all begins with your viewing your peers as valuable resources. The Talmudic sage Rabbi Hanina reflects, Harbe lomadati meraboisai. Much have I learned from my mentors. Umichaverai yosu meraboisai. And more from my colleagues than from my mentors. Umi talmidai yosu mikulon. And from my students more than all of them. Here the sage recognizes the value both of cultivating a mentor and of acquiring a colleague, but suggests that even more empowering is sharing that knowledge with others. Each and every one of you should be actively looking for an apprentice. Not because it's a great way to give back to the community. It is. But because it'll impact your growth as positively as it does that of your apprentice. You see, the Talmud instructs the teacher, Chanak lenar al pi darchai. Teach the student according to their way. If one wishes to truly reach a student, perforce they must speak in the student's vernacular. And that wisdom, it's not merely prescriptive, it's descriptive as well. The process of teaching another person causes you to view the material as they would. And that in turn opens your mind to new insights and greater understanding. Don't think that you've got nothing to offer an apprentice. Know that by being here today at an industry conference, by attending this session, you are the 1%. The people that you've seen here today and interacted with, and I'm talking about attendees, not just speakers and organizers, they are not the software development community. They are the leaders of the software development community, and that includes each and every one of you. You know far, far more than you think you do. And sharing that knowledge with others, it will advance your knowledge even further. Now, if formal mentoring isn't for you, perhaps invite a junior developer to work closely with you on a side project. Maybe prepare a presentation for your local user group or submit it to a conference. You would be amazed how much you gain simply from that process of preparation. My friend Eric Hogue, he tweeted this about the amazing side benefit of growing his own understanding while preparing a talk for last year's True North PHP. Eric gets it. And if public speaking isn't your thing, consider writing instead. The same phenomena exists. You will be the primary beneficiary of the process. Submit an article to an industry magazine. Start a blog. If you have a blog, blog more. Just put some ideas together loosely in a GitHub gist and open it for public discussion. If you're ambitious, write a book. Yeah. My friend Matt Frost, the other co-host of the Loosely Coupled podcast, he recently completed work on a book on OAuth authentication. Now, Matt would be the first to tell you, when he began that project, he was not an OAuth guru. And when he started, he really wasn't a writer either. Today, 10 months later, he's both. Matt gets it. The possibilities, they're limited only by your creativity and your inhibitions. Yes, learn from your mentors, learn from your colleagues, but grow the most by sharing your knowledge with others. Let's talk about the community. The Talmud does tend to take the existence of a vibrant community somewhat for granted, even going so far as to suggest that real learning doesn't exist ela b'chabura, but as part of a group. The sage Shimon ben Zoyma taught, Ezehu chacham, haloi mid mikol adam. Who is wise? One who learns from everyone. And that's another maxim which is both descriptive as well as prescriptive. It's traditionally understood as a prescription to view everyone that you encounter as having something to contribute. And that's incredible advice on its own. But I think it can also be understood as a description of the wise approach to knowledge acquisition. Crowdsourcing, learning from everyone. You're already at a conference. That's a big one. If this is your first conference, soak it up. Come again. Now, if you regularly attend, keep it up. You likely already understand their benefit. Conferences allow you to stay abreast of new tools and technologies for an investment of days instead of weeks or months. And that gives you more time to focus on growing your skills in the areas that are more immediately relevant, while still staying ahead of that incredible pace of change in our industry. Now, regarding conferences, don't overlook the hallway track. The sessions the last 2 days have been incredible. But that opportunity to cross-pollinate with such a wide cross-section of the community should not be underestimated, nor should it be missed. Similar in many ways are your local user group. While the cross-section might not be as large, they still expand your ecosystem, and that repetitive nature allows you to form perhaps more significant relationships with other developers a bit more quickly. Now, what if you don't have a local user group? Start one. I recently launched a group in New Jersey called ShorePHP. Now, why did I do that? Well, of course, we had no local user group, and PHP community super evangelist Cal Evans twisted my arm, really. And following Cal Evans' advice, I fulfilled the Talmud's directive, b'mokom she'en anoshim, lishtadel liyos ish. In a place where there is nobody, endeavor to be somebody. Cal Evans gets it. As a community person, he innately understands that the more one interacts with the community, the more one gives to the community, the more one receives in return. And let's not forget open source. If you're not contributing to open source, you're doing yourself a disservice. I'll let you in on a little secret. The open source community, they don't need any single developer. But every single developer needs the open source community. Developing software with a large group of your peers, it's a transformative experience. And as professional developers, you need to be a part of it. The Talmud's advice, or its wisdom regarding community, is straightforward. It admonishes us, al tifrosh min hatzibur. Do not separate yourself from the community. The Talmud recognizes that the community is our lifeline, and without it, we are adrift. Finally, let's consider the individual. The Talmud relates the story of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was away from his home 12 years at a far-off yeshiva in pursuit of his studies. And after 12 years, he returns home along with several of his students. And when they reach the porch of his home, he overhears his wife answering someone who had questioned her judgment in allowing him to be away for so long in pursuit of his studies. If it were up to me, she says proudly, he could stay another 12 years. And the Talmud relates that upon hearing that, Rabbi Akiva and his students, they did an about face. That's exactly what they did. They returned to the distant yeshiva, and they stayed fully immersed in their studies for an additional 12 years. Now, the question is famously asked. They traveled so far. I mean, they were gone for so long. Why didn't he at least stay? Why the about face on the porch? And the insightful answer is that according to Talmudic arithmetic, the growth of 12 and 12 is just not the same as a continuous 24. The Talmud's perspective on growth and understanding, and that's really one of the things that we're aiming for when we talk about our growth as software developers. Growing not simply our knowledge or our skills, but our understanding, is that retention, mere retention, is a myth. Understanding which is nurtured grows. Understanding which is neglected withers. And that's Rabbi Akiva's logic. He's traveling with his students, so he's immersed in his learning right up until the moment that he overhears his wife. And at that moment, he's faced with a choice. He can either return, continue his growth, or stay and risk regression. For professional developers, the advice is simple. Always be coding. There's really no way of escaping it. We can talk about it. We can read about it. You can listen to somebody else talk about it. But to grow our craft, we have to practice our craft, and we have to do so consistently. My friend Joe Kazuo-Kennis. That's an outdated slide. It's up over 800 days now. Coding every day. Joe gets it. Now, know that that's not going to work for all of us. I understand. Sometimes you just need a break. I couldn't do that. But understand, like Joe does, that consistency is the key for growth. And Rabbi Akiva's logic, it also applies to context, because context is really just micro-consistency. We're all aware of the impact of context switching and interruption on our productivity. In the workplace, we get really creative. We set aside coding-only hours, social media blackout periods, private offices, noise-canceling headphones. I know some people that in larger open offices, they even work away from their desk to avoid interruption. Ask yourself, does your coding at home resemble your coding in the workplace in terms of isolating yourself from distraction? You see, just as an athlete builds muscle memory through repetition with proper form, we build mental muscle memory every time we code. So if you want to grow your ability to maintain context and focus when coding professionally, you have to be as diligent about it when coding casually. Your vacational coding habits should resemble your vocational coding habits if you wish them to be strengthened. Now, aside from rigorous analysis, the most salient features of Talmudic methodology can be summed up in 2 words: verbalize, repetition. Let's start with verbalization. The application, simple. Good developers talk to themselves. You see, since verbalization, it involves different parts of the brain than mere thought. So that process of rubber ducking an understanding, which was previously entirely mental, it necessarily increases our understanding. It's not an issue of if you can't explain it, you don't understand it. No, not at all. Rather, by explaining it, you come to understand it more fully. And by rubber ducking regularly, we also gain one of the primary benefits of pair coding, even when coding alone. I found that verbalization also improves concentration. If I'm having difficulty maintaining focus or context, I'll actually narrate as I code. I will describe each and every line of code as I write it. Yeah, fortunately, most of my coding's at home. But I should do that all the time, because my focus improves, but the quality of my code improves as well as I gain additional clarity and insight from that act of verbalization. Another great strategy which works similarly, preemptive commit messages. Writing your commit message prior to beginning coding. You'll find that your solutions are cleaner and your commits are more granular by adopting that one simple practice. It's like named feature branches taken to their logical extreme. I've also found that being disciplined about diagramming solutions, even the most simple solutions prior to their implementation, have an observable impact on the quality of my code. You simply cannot whiteboard enough. We recently moved the engineering team away from the larger company. We just had run out of space. The largest line item on the remodel of the new space for the engineering team, $23,000 for whiteboard paint. Yeah? You simply can't do it enough. Don't think, though, that verbalization is only a tool to help you plan solutions or work through challenges. Do an experiment. For an entire afternoon, every time you are about to commit code, anybody catch what I did there? An entire afternoon, every time you're about to commit code? Yeah? Small, granular commits. It's really, really key. But for an entire afternoon, every time you're about to commit code, rubber duck first. Explain your implementation to yourself as you might to a teammate. Better yet, diffuse some of that tribal knowledge, explain it over to a teammate. Not only will the other members of your team love you because your commit messages will be more, they'll be more descriptive and meaningful, but you'll be shocked just how frequently that exercise causes you to take your proverbial finger off the trigger, to go back and reconsider and improve your code prior to making that commit. A similar practice, which can dramatically improve the quality of your code, is to be disciplined about reviewing the diff prior to each commit. See, reviewing your changes file by file and line by line, rather than in their logical context, it serves as a tremendous sanity check on your implementation. It almost magically removes blind spots that you might have been unaware of along the way. It's very much like a one-person code review. Now, regarding repetition, the Talmud observes, "Ein doima shana pirku mea l'shana pirku mea ve'echad." One who reviews their learning 100 times simply cannot be compared to one who reviews 101 times. Can't be compared to one that reviews only 100 times. Really? Obviously, the Talmud does not consider repetition to be about mere retention. Obviously, the one who reviewed their learning 100 times certainly retained it. Rather, it's about increased insight and understanding. And the application for us as software developers? Code katas. For the professional software developer, katas are akin to a musician rehearsing or a baseball player taking batting practice. They offer us an opportunity to practice our craft, unfettered from external influence from the project or stakeholders, deadlines, etc. They're focused on process, the analysis and decision-making used to arrive at a solution. It's invaluable, and it's something that really cannot be experienced any other way. I've not yet met Johann Broadwell, but Johann gets it. Coding katas is the programmer equivalent of push-ups. The sage Hillel is oft quoted, "Lo habaishin loime," the timid does not learn. To get where you want to go as a developer, to get where you ought to want to go as a developer, it takes a little chutzpah. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to challenge assumptions. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And don't be afraid to fail. Ultimately, we are responsible for our own growth, so it is imperative not to allow our inhibitions to slow our advance. The timid does not learn. The Talmud relates another story of Rabbi Akiva, how he was inspired to begin his studies at what was then considered the advanced age of 40, when he encountered a large boulder with a hole bored through its entirety by the steady drip of water from an overhang. And Rabbi Akiva from that realized the value of small beginnings, and that steady effort, no matter how limited, can accomplish great things. The Talmud observes that kol escholas koshios, all beginnings are difficult. The antidote to difficult beginnings is to recognize that even a small beginning has value, and that steady effort can overcome even the most imposing obstacle. That is my very first open source contribution. Yeah, a grammar and style edit to the PHP the right way FAQ. Small beginnings. You see, our growth as software developers, it should be understood and approached as we approach software development. It's an iterative process, best measured over time. It's not easy. But as the Talmud observes, lefum tsara agra. According to the difficulty is the reward. I will leave you this afternoon with the words of the sage Hillel in 3 parts. Hillel begins, Im ein li, me li. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? Know that it takes chutzpah to avoid the fate of the timid, that you have to ask questions and ask for help, question assumptions and risk failure, to value those small beginnings, and to practice as we wish to perform, leveraging consistency and remembering the benefits of rubber ducking and other verbalization techniques, of coding katas and cultivating mentors. Hillel continues, Ukashani latzmi, ma'ani. But if I'm only for myself, what am I? It is imperative to stay connected to the community, to value learning together with our peers, pair coding, code reviews, conferences, user groups, sharing our knowledge with others, and stepping up to fill a void. At this point, I hope that each of you have noted just one thing that you can perhaps take away and implement immediately to accelerate your growth as a software developer. That's it. I've done what I can do. That's all I've got. So I will conclude, as did Hillel, by asking, Im lo yakshov, Amosai. If not now, when?